took the job as an examiner when it was offered to me, both in Asia and in the United States. Very, very important, aviation safety and breaking that link that results in an accident. That's how many CFIs do we have here? A whole bunch. That's your job, is to make sure that people comply with the regulations. You teach in accordance with what the FAA puts out there, and then finding old timers like John, myself, Dominic, and the people from the FAA who guide us to make sure that people don't have accidents. And of course, we always want to have fun, make sure our students have fun, but also the number one thing is aviation safety. Because when you've seen the dead bodies, when you've seen the mangled wreckage, it strikes home. And having to tell your boss, I had to tell a 3-star general that we lost one of his boys, and that's very, very difficult. And working with those who have perished and working with the families on occasion, that's really, really hard. You don't ever want to have to do that. So your job is to make sure that when you teach everybody to be, number one, safe.
Hi, my name is John Goebel. I'm an examiner for specialty light aircraft. Been an examiner for about 18 years, CFI for probably 30, flying for about 55 years now, and still alive more or less. I was an Army pilot for many years in Vietnam before some of you guys were born. Flew a lot of missions there, had fun. Commercial instrument, multi-engine, all that good stuff. The stuff I want to talk about a little bit later is the mosaic. You may have heard of that. Under the topic of what's new in aviation, it seems like there's a lot of small things that are happening, but there's also several large areas that impact pretty much everybody here, everybody in the aviation world. And the goal of that by the FAA and others is to get more people involved in flying and aviation, because there's really hasn't been that much lately. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, if that's okay.
Thank you both. And for those online, starting with Randall, why don't we go over to you guys? Do a brief introduction.
Hey, glad to be here. Examiner, Portland, Maine. I'm currently booked into June with the wait list going, but I prioritize CFI initials. I take aircraft accidents really personally, and was just yesterday texting with another examiner about another recent accident. It's always heartbreaking, and as I tell people who sit down in front of me for tests, I just need you to come back home alive after every flight. And certainly for instructors, we need to see that for them and their students. So that's really the bar that we're holding up. In addition to the FAA's test, is do I think you're going to make it through your flights? And there's really nothing more important. So as Mark says, when you've seen the wreckage, it comes right home to you. We've all lost friends in airplanes, and I'm really sad about that.
Thanks, Randall. And Pat, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Dominic. My name is Pat Curtis, former military examiner in T-38s and C-130s. And did 20 years of flying in the Air Force, and then 10 years of staff work. Retired in Exeter, and I'm an instructor at Hampton. And I'm a relatively new DPE compared to everybody else, about almost a little bit less than a year and a half as a DPE in the civilian world. So I'm glad you've put this together. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Rich, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Rich McIsaac. I work out of Northampton Airport in Northampton, Massachusetts. And Pat, I have you beat. I've been an examiner since February. So working private instruments and commercials, single engine. So happy to be here, and looking forward to hearing what other people have to say.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure, because we have a couple phone numbers and things calling in, is there any examiner that I missed? Great. Okay. Thank you, everybody. As you could tell, we have a pretty diverse background tonight, so we'll have a few different perspectives on things. One last thing before we get started, there is a sign-up sheet in the back in case you are looking for FAA Basic Wings tonight. For this event, you'll get 1 credit for the basic knowledge portion. And if you write your name on the back, we'll process that either tomorrow or the next day. And I want to thank John Bell and Lindsay from the Portland FISDO for helping set up tonight as well. With all
Dominic,
that,
for those of us online, how to do wings credit?
yeah, thank you, Randall. If you go ahead and send me a message on Teams or in my email address that I'll post here, you can contact me directly. I do have the audience attendance list printed off of Teams for this evening, and I'll give you wings credit again tomorrow or the next day. So thank you. Okay, let's get to it. So the first topic, of course, is always going to be the biggest topic, which is issues with applicant preparation. This is a question that we get repeatedly sent over to us each year we do this. So what I'd like to start with is getting your perspectives on what you're seeing as far as applicant preparation issues go. And please include any comments or thoughts you might have on that topic.
Okay, I'll start off. Everybody hear me okay? Can you all see me? I'm over here. Thank you. The one thing I just wrote down, read the fine print. For example, if you look at 8s on pylons, this is something that we have to go back to the books. I don't think there's a day that goes by, and I've been flying for 60 years. I know I look a lot younger, but nonetheless, I've been flying for a long time, and I'm always still in the books because I figure I don't know anything, and I'm always trying to catch up, stay ahead of what I'm teaching and what I'm evaluating, observing with the instructors who work for us. But if you look at certain maneuvers, for example, 8s on pylons, when you teach that and your student comes in prepared for the guided discussion, remember that from your handbooks, they talk about, well, if the pylon is in front of the reference point, and as you know, it's not necessarily something on the wing, it's whatever you decide is going to be out that side, it's going to be the reference point. If it's in front, you go down. If it's behind that reference point, the pylon, you go up. Well, if you read the fine print, what it talks about is if you start and you realize, oh, I haven't reached the pylon yet. My reference point has not reached the pylon yet. What are you allowed to do? You're allowed to roll out, fly up to the reference point, maintaining that pivotal altitude, whatever it may be, and then put the wing back on, or the reference point back on the pylon, and then go up and down. I don't think many people really know that. And if you go back and reread those things in the airplane flying handbook in particular, you'll find these little things that are hidden in there that you can do, and they're acceptable during a flight test.
Anybody do any instruction in multi-engine aircraft? Yep. Do you still do single engine stalls? No. Even simulated? Yeah. Mhm. How do you find students do when you start doing that? Yeah. Yeah. One of the that used to be part of the curriculum for multi-engine to do a single engine stall, and had some bad results, so they stopped doing that pretty much. One of the things that CFIs you may need, I'm not sure if it's possible to do a better job, but the level of nervousness I find during an exam, which is just natural, some of it, but when it gets to be excessive, I keep thinking the CFIs must be are in a position to somehow alleviate that or minimize that. Any techniques that you have that seem to have worked, that people go in there a lot more relaxed and doing what they're capable of doing instead of basically underperforming because of the nerves. I mean, we've all been through check rides, and there's an inherent element of nerves when it comes to that. No matter how many times you've done it, I must have done, I don't know, 50, 80 check ride, receiving on the receiving end. You still get a little want to do it just right. So, any techniques that you want to share that you think helps people go to a practical exam with a little more positive attitude about nerves?
Thank you. And for our folks online, would you like to comment on that topic?
Pat and I both have pretty extensive intake lists. I see Pat speaking, but I can't hear him. Pat and I both have pretty extensive intake forms. So many challenges in making sure that we've got all the paperwork and all the right tasks fulfilled and all that good stuff. That's really one of the biggest pieces, is making sure that you've read the test document, that you know what's expected of you, and like Mark says, you know what you're allowed to change and how you're allowed to adjust. Maneuver wise, specifically, I think if we had to point to one maneuver that's a challenge, it's the power off 180 pretty well exclusively. I see that on a bunch of different check rides, and retest it a lot. Because you're used to doing it at your home field. You've set yourself up some good visual references. You go to a check ride somewhere else, and suddenly you don't have the same visual references, and so you're thrown off a little bit. And I think the more we can be prepared by just knowing what's on the test, by reading through the documents, I think the better shape we're going to be in. And to John's point about being relaxed for rides, the more you can be in charge of your nervous system in an airplane, but also when you're sitting down with an examiner, the better. I had an examiner who yelled the whole time on purpose to load me up. As soon as we got in the airplane, he was barking orders at me. And that wasn't my style. I learned a lot. I won't like to go back to him ever again. But the more you can manage your nervous system, the better the ride's going to go.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I tell every applicant before we go to the flight phase that something's going to happen that you've never seen before. And you're going to have to roll with it. You're going to have to be a pilot in command and make the decisions as if I'm not here, because I will not help you. And I've had situations, within the past 2 weeks, I had a dual EFIS failure. I've had flap failures. I've had engine problems. And the applicant looks at me like I caused it. And I say, I didn't do anything. So, and it's a skill that's really hard to develop. I think the compartmentalization of just throwing whatever happened in the past out of the way and just look forward to what you're doing. And I know it's difficult. I try to make it as relaxed as possible. And most of the stress is self-imposed. And we understand that. So just realize things are going to happen that you've not expected, or you're going to be asked a question that you've never heard before, and you have to go back to the basics. I don't know if it was Mark talking about the books. I'm glad you mentioned rereading the books. I find myself doing that still for everything. And I can say that I have 100% failure rate when I've asked my applicants, do you have the airplane flying handbook? Do you have the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge? Do you have the FAR aim? And they give me a blank stare, or they download it on ForeFlight there and right then and there. Nobody passes if they have not opened the books. And so you have to get into the FAA canon that's specified in the ACS, and know what's in the books. Do I expect you to memorize what's in it? No. Can you look it up? Sure. Does Google work? Not all the time. So that would be my encouragement for preparation in terms of the ground eval. We can get to more flight stuff later.
One thing I tell, now that I'm not an examiner now, I can give out all the clues that I've got. But what I tell people when they're preparing for a test, I tell them, don't ask, can I do this or that? Because the examiner, John, I don't know if you feel the same way or the other examiners do, but the one thing we don't want is for people to say, can I do this? Should I do a clearing turn? That's not a good question. You either know or you don't know. So you teach your students, do what you were taught, what you're supposed to do, what the FAA tells you to do. And if the examiner doesn't want you to look up the answer, they'll tell you. Certain things, obviously, we have to know. We have to know the procedure for an engine fire on start, spin recoveries, and so on. So no, they're not going to let you look that up. But other things that come out of the AIM, for example, weather symbology, things of that nature, they can look up without having to ask. So teach your students, don't ask, can I look it up? Because they should know where it is too.
Regarding people going into a practical exam, I spent just the first few minutes just chit-chatting with them in general. And you can always tell the level of nervousness, how uptight they are about the upcoming events. So one thing that seems to work a little bit, and you guys may have better examples of doing that, is to say, we're not going to do anything that you haven't done at least 10, 15, 20 times before. And that thought that, okay, this is just like stuff that I've done many times over, so it's not going to be a big deal. Regarding Mark's point about you start the oral part of the exam saying that this is an open book exam, if you will. You can look up anything that you need, provided you don't take 10 minutes looking through the FARs trying to find the results. So that happened a few times. I said, okay, there's a limit to this. Well, the regulations don't say anything about a limit, but I do. So, you can't stand there for hours looking up the answers to every question. But regardless, and I've seen this many times, underperformance, knowing that this person is a good pilot, the fact that they're adversely affected by the event itself of being an exam, and they're underperforming. That's always been an issue with me as to how do you overcome that. So if you have any techniques that you think relaxes your students, share that with everybody if you could.
One thing I want to throw out there is that several years ago, me and another examiner, Neil Singer, started a DPE Forum, is what we call it. I chair it along with Neil. And this is an opportunity for you to write to me. If you need my contact information, I'll give it to you. If you have a question, then we can still ask the examiners. So we get together via Zoom and we talk about things to make, and the reason I started this was to make sure that all the examiners, especially the new ones, had a conduit to ask questions. Of course, the real answer comes from the FAA, from the FSDOs, and they're really the ones, but at least we can bring up those questions. We may have the answer, but we always defer to the FSDOs if we don't have a definitive answer, which means we also have a reference that we can point people to and say, hey, this is where you need to look it up. But if you have questions, you want to ask the other examiners, and you need my information, I'll be glad to give that to you.
Thank you. And I do want to bounce back and forth between the audience and the pre-canned questions tonight. So if you have a question anytime, feel free to raise your hand. We can go into the audience as well. This is not going to be only a one-sided 5-person group conversation tonight. So at any point, if something crosses your mind or you're like, I have to know what they think about this, raise your hand. Okay. One thing we got in from the audience was issues upon arrival regarding airworthiness of aircraft. And I think the mention of this question is, do you have or do you see any trends with applicants showing up to the check ride with unairworthy aircraft? And we can leave the institutions anonymous, of course. But have you all seen any issues with that recently?
I have not. I've had one aircraft not in this state that was not airworthy, but or not in this region. So I've not had that issue.
They ask us to do a cursory walk around and look at the airplane if we don't know it before the test. Obviously not a complete pre-flight, but to look everything over to make sure that everything generally checks out before the test even starts, so we can make sure that you're qualified and the airplane's qualified. And generally I do a pretty good job of that. I did have an exam one time where the applicant had real trouble telling me about the gear system. And so I knew that when we went out, I needed to watch his gear system pre-flight like a hawk. And sure enough, there were springs broken and we flagged it. His instructor happened to be there. They had flown that airplane in with the gear springs broken. And I flagged it for the instructor and the student. And of course, at that moment, the test ended. But in general, in the Northeast, I find that we do a pretty good job with maintenance and paperwork. Every once in a while, there'll be a sticker that didn't get put in the logbook and we need to make a phone call. But in general, I haven't lost anybody to maintenance except that one plane.
So moving on. The other big question that always tends to pop up is instructor endorsements and paperwork challenges. Have you seen any trends regarding paperwork challenges upon an applicant's arrival to a check ride, prior to a check ride being given? And what are your experiences out in the field currently?
Okay, this is Mark again.
I put my applicants through a ringer before they come to me. I have them go through all the requirements for depending on their test. I have them send me pictures of logbooks, both and required documents. So I try to do an eligibility check before we even see each other. The problematic, in my experience, aeronautical experience is the commercial, especially the solo or PIC time, the 10 hours. That's can be, which you can't mix. Sometimes the cross countries are not sufficient. Sometimes the instrument time on the commercial is also not well documented, and you can't pull forward from before the instrument check unless it's been documented as 61-129 training. So I've had to turn away a couple applicants with commercial applicants because of those problematic, the instrument time and the solo or PIC time.
And same deal with me. I've got a pretty big intake form and like to look over all the paperwork before folks get there. I've heard some examiners say, what, you want to take the test for them? And other examiners have long intake forms. So there's really two different ways to think about, do you just show up cold on the day of the test, or do we do everything we can on our side to help you get there? Those slots are so precious because there's such a backlog that it feels like it's been helpful to cue people on, please send those documents ahead of time. In general, I haven't come close to losing a couple people, but haven't. One that I almost lost was a person who had showed up for an instrument instructor ride who had their CFI certificate with them, but not their commercial certificate. And of course, on the back of the CFI certificate, what's the limitation? Not valid unless accompanied by the commercial certificate. So in this case, we had a problem. My afternoon applicant had canceled, and I volunteered to fly back to their home airport with them and test them there as PIC. But you shouldn't really expect that if you were to show up at an exam. without a pilot certificate. Oops.
At East Coast Aero Club, I made a form with all the requirements, for example, for the private. We have all the instructors go through it, and then they give it to me when they're done, stating that they've looked at everything and the student complies. So this saves the student and also the examiner's time to make sure that things are done. And we actually caught things that were not completed by even 1/10. The person had to go back out and fly that task, whatever it may be, whatever it was, to fulfill the requirements. But we caught it with this form, which was very helpful. The other issue, and the examiners can please talk to this as well, is the number of or the names. The question on the names is, first of all, if you look at the 8710-1, the application to take a check ride, in the directions which precede, if you go online, you'll see the directions. It talks about how many names and what names to use. Normally, people have 3 names. They may have more, but there's only so many names that they can use. So you need to establish that when your student walks in the door and say, you got to use these names. Take a look at the passport, and that's a good place to start, or a birth certificate. So when we have people with 3 names and they use only their middle initial, or they don't use their middle name, I think that's a problem. When I left, that was an issue and a continuing issue. So I'm going to ask the other examiners, is there any new guidance on that?
We do have new guidance on that, and one of the examiners up in northern New England went to Oklahoma City about it. We can do corrections, but not changes. So middle initial or something misspelled or middle name not in there. My understanding is that now we are allowed to fix that at the test, but we're not allowed to change a name.
One thing about the logbook entries, the endorsements that have to be made, there's a circular out there. Generally, the day before an exam, I make sure that the instructor has all the pertinent endorsements put into the logbook, so I don't have to, you don't have to waste time during the day of the exam verifying all that. And then if there's stuff missing that should be there. Regarding the 8710-1 or 11 in the case of sport pilots, that used to be a nightmare because people would make stupid little mistakes, as Randall said. And with the IACRA, doing this online is really, well, it's actually, I think, impossible to make a mistake with that. I know I should never say that, but it really helped a lot to do that. So.
The issues I see is when an applicant goes to take their written and PSI or the student or somebody gets the name wrong, and that forces the like misspelling Scott, Scoot. What that does is the test report does not get linked to the 8710 in IACRA, and it forces a paper application, which is painful for everybody. And it takes usually bypass rate for a paper application is less than 50%. So I encourage your applicants early on that they make sure that their name with the testing agency is exactly as it looks in their government issued ID and their pilot certificate. Otherwise, it turns into a paper application, which is fraught with it's an 87 or it's a 30% pass rate up at Oklahoma City.
When you say pass rate, you're talking about the paperwork being accepted, not the applicant's performance, right?
Yeah, good point, Randall. It's whether the application, you can pass a test, right, with a paper application. It's just it runs into problems and we have to make corrections. And it's partially the applicant's responsibility, partially the DPE's responsibility to make sure that the paperwork is done correctly. But it's that's what I mean. Thanks for the question.
We had a great question in the chat too that Dominic said we could address about differing DPE expectations for how ground training is logged. One of the interesting things I found when I got to the DPE seat was I would send questions like that to my managing specialist, who would say, here's the guidance. That's all I can give you. I cannot interpret this for you. And so by that same token, you can do a great job of looking at all the guidance as well. So what ground training has to be done, what ground training is required, that's spelled out on the far end. And so the question then becomes, what's an acceptable endorsement of that? And my understanding may be different from someone else's understanding. And speaking to specifics, so that people would come say, hey, let's make sure we do it the way that DP wants it or that DP wants it. That feels really problematic. And I'm sorry I don't have a better answer than that. I think my understanding of it is, as long as you say that you have given that ground training, to me, that's acceptable. And so those things are laid out that have to be taught. And so it's really easy to endorse for that. Now, where we run into challenges is this. So let's say an instructor comes with a student and they're missing those things because you didn't send pictures ahead of time, we didn't look at them, or the examiner didn't offer, or whatever. Now the instructor just says, oh, sure, I'll sign all that here. Well, did you do it? Did you actually do it? Or are you signing to say that you did it and you didn't do it? So that we run into that sometimes as well.
Speaking personally, I like to see some ground training. Some logbooks have a specific page near the back where it lists you can document your ground training. Some people put the ground training right inside the logbook as as like a flight entry, but with no flight time. So I like to see a record of ground training.
I just had a question. In terms of IACRA and getting it submitted, what would you guys prefer as a timeline to have it done by? I know we have up to 48 hours prior, but in terms of preference, would you guys prefer a month out, 2 weeks out?
I'm trying to imagine in what world that could actually happen. When someone submits and signs up and does an intake form for me, I really prefer that your application is signed at that point, because I'm going to go in and look at it and make sure that everything's there 2 to 3 days before our test, if I can get to it. And that's where we discover some stuff that may need to be corrected. So as much as possible, if you're able to get it done well before the test, that's a really good thing to make sure that we don't show up on the day of with issues.
I'm about the same. I start contacting, I put together my schedule. I lay it out through the end of May so far, but about 2 weeks prior to my check rights for, say, 2 weeks from now, I contact every applicant. I make sure they're ready to go, and I'd like to see an 8710 complete so I can do the same thing Randall did. And if I don't see it, I'm not going to get upset about it. I just say, hey, let me know when you get it in. And if it's about 3 to 4 days prior and I don't see a signed 8710, I'm about ready to put someone else in the slot.
It's not often that we get a question over text. We got a question over text. A particular observer here said and asked, what do examiners think of logbook entries that only say quote unquote landings, not even specifying the type, or quote unquote steep turns, and state nothing else about that flight? This is an issue I have with transfer students when assessing logbooks. As I tell students, if it's not logged, it didn't happen. My mechanic writes long enough entries for maintenance. Imagine if all he wrote was quote unquote fixed airplane and signed it.
Boy, it's almost like, is there some kind of regulation that tells us how we should be logging flights and what needs to be included? Sorry, maybe that wasn't helpful.
I didn't do the badunst. you guys like to comment on that one or? Bigger logbooks. Yeah.
Hi, how
You
you
know,
doing?
if we had to go back and do, and it, like a reverse, let's say someone failed a test. If you went back into the logbooks and, you know, saw how things were done, that might be indicative. I like to tell my clients as an instructor, you are responsible for your training. You're responsible for making sure you keep track of what's going on. So it's like part of it is the applicant, the student, is making sure that the records are there because you know that's part of the presentation to the DPE that you're prepared. So we said in the Air Force, it's not the student that graduates, it's the grade book. So it kind of applies with the FAA as well.
Yeah, and I'll build
Hey,
on what Pat is saying a little bit with the grade book. A lot of the schools, 141 and a lot of 61 schools have student records that they keep, and those can be very helpful. Outside of that, some commercially available things like the ASA or the little Jeppesen folders, with the type of teaching I do now, there's a company that creates a check sheet that cross-references to the publications that they produce. Is just having something like that that has a list of the dates of the maneuvers and how the student performed on it and everything. It's a very simple, folds over 3 times or simple kind of card type of sheet. Makes a big difference when you go to the check ride. And also makes a big difference when you have multiple instructors flying with somebody. The type of teaching I do now, I'm usually the one kind of doing the finish up prep to really make sure they're ready, but they've probably flown with 4 or 5 other instructors beforehand. And, not every instructor is good at teaching things, so they tend to skip them. And you get near the final prep and you find out that, oh, here's something very basic that was missed. So I would encourage the instructors, if you don't have that at your school, look at getting something, whether it is electronic or, old paper and pencil.
I have a question. I'm a flight instructor from Southern Maine Aviation in Maine. We have a flight recording system that we record all the different grounds for all the way through private pilot. But we don't record the specific regulation for the items. And we have a specific examiner that wants to see those regulations recorded to demonstrate ground compliance. Is that a requirement, or is there a way to submit that to meet that requirement?
If I understand your question, you're asking if I say steep turns, is that acceptable versus giving the specific FAR number and letter? Is that right?
Correct, right. This examiner wants to see all of the specific requirements listed in the Part 61 listed out as ground training given for this FAR.
Yeah, I suspect it would be that same question that we mentioned before, where if I took this to my managing specialist, the response I would get back is, here is the reg, I cannot interpret it for you. So it is left up to individual DP discretion as to how we do it. I think if you were to do both, number and letter and the name of the maneuver, it covers you. Feels a little, some people do it one way, some people do it another. To me, the spirit of the regulation is satisfied if you go one way or the other, but I may not be the person examining you. So I'm sorry that we don't have a better answer for you than that.
Okay, so to dot all the i's and cross the t's, probably just update the specific task item to include the 61.xyz.
Is there any
And that's-
reason not to?
Nope.
Dotting i's and crossing t's, that's kind of what we're doing. I mean,
Thank you.
I think as a CFI, it's helpful for you to have a checklist to make sure you're covering, the knowledge areas A through K or whatever is appropriate, and then check those off. As a DPE, am I looking for that level of detail? Not necessarily. But another DPE, I think another DPE is fully in their right to say, hey, do we have this documented training? So like Randall, I'm not going to give you a good answer. My apologies.
Hello, everyone. My name is Diego Munoz, and I recently became a private pilot. And I just want to have something to add to this topic because, at least for my flight instructor, what she did was print out a paper with the FARs and the list of maneuvers and sign off on the things we did and just kind of check the boxes of the thing we completed. So like that, it would be easier for the examiner. So that would be like something that could be considered to do for the CFIs or whoever may be listening to this conversation.
yeah, that's a great way to do it. In my plan of action, I have pasted in a copy of the relevant FAR. So I'm looking at the exact same source document that you are at that point. That's a great way to do it.
Congrats on your private certificate.
So something's changed with flight instructors not that long ago. How flight instructors refresh their certificates, if you will, who can sign off a CFI initial applicant. Have any of you seen any changes in the quality of applicant or issues with CFI initial applicant check rides that are noteworthy?
I haven't seen a quality difference, but we are supposed to verify that the instructor who has given instruction is qualified to do it. So that's the guidance we have about it. And so the question comes up, do you need to be a qualified CFI to give some piece of that training? Then training, can that be done by someone who doesn't have either the 2 years or the 5 applicant passes? The answer is no. That is CFI training, and it does need to be done by a qualified CFI, and we're supposed to see proof of that when we're qualifying applicants.
This is Mark again. A couple of weekends ago, I was invited to be on a panel down at Mike Goulian's school in Plymouth, and it was the topic was aerobatic safety. But I made the statement: if I were king of the world, which I'm not, I would have everybody start with Piper Cubs, and then they would transition to Stearmans, and then to the big round engine 600 horsepower T6s or SNJs. And then we'd let them fly the Cessnas and all that. So my point is that the instructors are mostly pretty young, unless you get the old hang-ons like myself, who just have trouble giving up instruction because we just really enjoy it. And we feel we're still making a difference. The one thing as a new instructor that when I look for, when I would sit them down and start the oral, I'd say, tell me about your experiences as in your training. What did you do? And what I was looking for was, well, I talked to Joe Bag of Donuts, who's been flying for many, many years, and I talked about experiences that he or she had, and I learned something from that. And that to me is so important in the military and then flying for an airline for FedEx. We sought out the people who'd been there and done that for many years to ask them their experiences. What went wrong? What did they do to get out of the predicament? How do you teach this? What are your techniques? And I think as a new instructor, I think that's one thing that is really lacking. In the military and in the airlines, they have a way of passing on information. In the military, we had the mishap investigation program and the reporting. So we learned about all the accidents, and in truck, in my case, it was with the fighters. But in FedEx, we did the same thing. So as new instructors, seek out the old guys and the older ladies who have been there for a while, and even great resources like Mr. Brown over here. He's taught me a lot. We've had a lot of conversations. The FAA, they've done a lot of things too that we can learn from. And that's what that's when I was testing, that's what I'd look for in a CFI. I wouldn't hold it against them if they didn't have that experience. That's not their fault. But the ones that I thought that I think that I found did better were the ones who sought out those who had done things before and sought out information.
Just one thing. Maybe you find this to be true as well, but it's just amazing how much better you get from being an instructor for a while. If you look back when you first started doing that, and you say, geez, I wish I learned this back then, I would have been a better instructor. A lot of that time is just by mistakes that you learn this stuff. But the military, as Mark was saying, the good thing, after every mission, I had to fill out a after-action report where you basically learn lessons learned from it. The same kind of thing I would suggest for you as a CFI after each flight. If there's anything that you want to learn, you want to do better the next time as an instructor, write that down. That's about good.
That's a good point, John. And I require our instructors to have a notebook to keep notes on all their students. And I tell them that whenever you sit down with me or one of our senior instructors or the owner or the chief of maintenance, have that notebook out, take notes. And what I'm trying to do is prepare them for when they move on to the military, mostly to the airlines or to corporate, so they take good notes.
When I was a new instructor in T-38s, I had a student who was a particular challenge, and after a month or two, he started to get it. And we were doing some aerobatics, we're doing Cuban 8s and loops, and he was just flying beautifully. And I didn't say anything. And he thought there was radio failure inside the intercom. He panics. He's like, sir, are you there? I'm like, still here. And it kind of dawned on me at that point where sometimes as an instructor, especially your students who are reaching the point where they're about to be kicked out of the nest and designated a PIC to go get their test, is you have to learn how to stay little and let your students make mistakes. I've seen applicants who have situations in flight where something comes up that they're not expecting, and they're at a loss, and they're used to the instructor save. And so as for new instructors, you may have to learn how to close your mouth sometimes, let the student make mistakes, but stay within your ability to save it, just to give the student that valuable experience.
We're seeing that at the bigger flight schools as well, where somebody comes for a commercial ride with only, the minimum amount of time alone in an airplane because they're setting them up with instructors. The ability to actually be pilot in command when something comes up is not to be trifled with. I heard an anecdotal story of a prop falling off during a check ride, and the applicant flew the airplane to the grassy field.
I sense there's a couple RV-12 pilots in the room. So why don't we start detouring over to the sport pilot land? That's okay with you, John. So we've been waiting on FAA Mosaic for some time. Most of you may be familiar with that. And it seems that there may be some updates with Mosaic throughout this year. I'll leave this topic to be broad if you'd like to start anywhere on it, but interested in hearing about sport pilot check rides, powered parachute, any trends, things you're seeing, or comments you want to make.
Yeah, regarding that topic, as you may or may not know, the TSA requires that all CFIs register with them. Are you, everybody aware of that? Maybe not. I wasn't really aware until fairly recently. That's there's an online registration form that you need to fill in, and then I got a call from a agent for the TSA. So I said, "Gee, what did I do?" Well, they actually go through your application for to be a CFI and to register with the TSA. Anyway, we talk about that later. But back to the topic of what's new in aviation. The Mosaic is everybody here heard of the Mosaic rule? It stands for modernization of special certificate, special certification, I think, something like that. And that was approved by Congress, I think, last year, and I think the FAA is slated to approve that in August, sometime this year. The reason that's an impactful event in aviation is because all of a sudden, with just a sport pilot license, which is the lowest level, takes a minimum amount of training. You can now fly an aircraft up to, I don't know, like almost 3,000 pounds, maximum takeoff weight. And as such, the 150s, even 172s qualified, the Pipers, the Comanches, 140, I think 160 as well. All of a sudden, all you need is a sport pilot license rather than a private license or higher. The other part of that is the basic med, which also, so with a driver's license basically, and some other requirements, you're able to fly these things. And the whole impact of the thrust or the goal of Mosaic is to get a lot more people involved in aviation. And just some interesting statistic, there's about 500,000 total licenses in the country right now, about 500,000 altogether, including private, commercial, ATP, recreation, all of them. The sport pilot out of that 500,000 is only about 7,500. So the expectation is to lower the barriers for entry into aviation by passing these rules and these new changes to it. So it's a pretty good deal for everybody overall. And because of the fact that much less training is required for sport pilot, depending for let's see, less for I think 20 hours for private instead of 40. Same with gyros and weight shift. 12 hours for powered parachute, so you can get a sport pilot license with 10 hours of dual and 2 hours of solo. And you know, it's less training, less initial cost, a lower barrier of entry. The other part, well, that was pretty much it. The sport pilot rules have also been created a number of years ago now, and that again was designed to get more people into aviation.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And of course,
I both also do sport pilot check rides. And apparently there's one other person in addition to John who's been coming to New England to do rides. I think he's from New York. I forget who that is, but these are all good things.
you can have a couple questions come through line, but I want to turn over to this audience too. Does anyone in the audience present have any questions they'd like to ask the panel? Keep rolling then. Common performance concerns. We talked a little bit earlier about Power Up 180's logging of steep turns. Across every spectrum of category, class, and certificate rating, have there been specific issues with any level of certification that you'd like to expand upon or comment on?
Okay, I observe and I give progress checks still, so I'm still in not the certification game, but I'm still watching people before they go up and take check rides or solo or go cross country, and especially take the tests. But some of the things that I still are finding is the brake check. People, pilots will go out and have 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, 1,300 RPM, launch out of the tie down, and then check the brakes without pulling the power to idle. That's right in the books. That's one thing that could start a test off very badly. The other one is a stabilized approach, and this is the basis of all landings. When they go to the military airlines, they better know the criteria. Start teaching the criteria now. It's in the airplane flying handbook. All the criteria: being on centerline, being on glide path, being configured, having the checklist done. When do you have the checklist done? Prior to the final approach fix, or somewhere prior to entering the pattern, or somewhere in the pattern. If there's an ongoing checklist, down to the line type of things. Everybody understand what down the line means? You read a certain number of things, and then you can't go any further because your gear is not ready to come down yet. You're not ready for the gear to come down. So the criteria for the stabilized approach is very, very important. IFR, loss of situation awareness and flying the wrong procedure turn, for example. The one thing that I found when I was administering tests was giving an unusual attitude with the autopilot. So we'd have them look down. I put the airplane into an unusual attitude with the autopilot on to make sure that they knew that they have to hit that red button, because this is kill people not understanding that the autopilot can put the aircraft out of control. The new ones with flight level change, capturing the airspeed, that type of thing, those are all wonderful, but you still have to understand, you have to teach people to hit that red button all the time. In the airlines, they're going to hit the red button. Normally it's on the throttles. It could be somewhere else. Spin knowledge. I've had several people fail in this, and I wrote up a whole syllabus. We don't have an aerobatic airplane anymore. Sorry, Steve, but they got rid of the aerobatic airplane. So Steve used to fly our aerobatic airplane. But we do it in the Redbird now, since that's the closest we can come. And I built a whole syllabus. If anybody wants it, it's free. I'll give it to you. You teach your students everything in that syllabus. They're going to do well on spins in the test for the CFI, but more importantly, use it for the private pilots, and they will have a pretty good understanding of what causes a spin and all that goes along with spin recoveries, to include the Beggs-Mueller approach. Raise your hand if you know what the Beggs-Mueller recovery is. I'm going to leave you with this. Very, very important. Not true with all airplanes. Airplanes that have washout. How many know what washout is? Okay, we have a private pilot over here who knows what washout is. That's pretty good. That's the twist to the wing that's built in when it's manufactured that allows the wing to stall at the wing root more and sooner than at the wingtip where the ailerons are, so the ailerons are still working. The Beggs-Mueller recovery simply is you pull the power to idle, let everything go, and the airplane will recover if it has washout, but not in all aircraft. So you have to know the aircraft. Go in the books, read about washout or the twist of the wing. Lack of knowledge of what causes the yaw, because you have to have a stall and something to yaw the airplane. And usually I hear P factor or torque or something like that. With torque, we don't really see it in these little airplanes because there's not enough torque. The only time we really see it is in aerobatics when we're going straight up with full power. The airplane starts to roll to the left. We have to use a little bit of right aileron when you get really, really slow. But these airplanes, it's not the biggest factor. P factor and adverse yaw are the two biggest factors. What's the airspeed while in a spin? I've heard people say very fast. And I say, okay, now you understand we're talking about airspeed. What does the airspeed indicator read when you're in a spin? Oh, it's fast. Like what? Oh, 100, 120 knots, 120 knots. And I say, now you understand I'm asking about airspeed, not vertical speed or anything else. And that stops the test right there. If they don't understand that they're stalled, we're done. Beginning to center or neutralize the rudder when the rotation stops. That is 99.99% of the people I ask for the spin recovery, they forget to say neutralize the rudder.
Just curious, what CFIs, seems like most of you are, what aircraft do you do training in? 172? Does that seem to be the dominant? Right? Yeah. There's quite a bit, quite a different, and quite a few of those with the Mosaic are now going to qualify as light sport aircraft. As light sport aircraft, which I think right now it's 1,320 pounds. It's supposed to go up to 26 or 28 or 3,000, something like that. So a lot of these aircraft in which you're instructing are now going to qualify as LSAs, light sport aircraft. As such, you can have sport pilots. You can train sport pilots to do that. I'm stopped doing pretty much all the other stuff, but doing SAEs, specialty aircraft examiner stuff. That world is really interesting, mostly because there's very low training required. 10 hours of dual for power parachutes, 20 hours, not even that. For it's 15 hours, I believe, dual instruction for the all the other ones, and 5 hours of solo. So as such, your students can now get a license before that, and then at some later time, if they want to go change that to a private license, they have essentially qualified for most of the private pilot rules. The night flying, you're not able to do that in a light sport aircraft unless you have a private license. So by the time you're ready to say, I want to do some night flying in a LSA, then all you need is basically 3 hours of nighttime instruction and some bunch of landings. So it's actually a good way to go for cost effectiveness. And you might want to keep that in mind when you're students that once this Mosaic thing is passed. That's pretty much it.
Thank you. Had a couple questions come in over email. The first was, my student was issued an unsatisfactory remark on a task during their check ride and now have lost all motivation to continue. How would you recommend I motivate them to continue on taking their retests now that they're afraid of examiners?
Had a friend whose son just washed out of SEAL training because of a specific thing. And what's interesting is that specific thing that he had in his head as he was going through the training that caused him to ring that bell and walk out of training was one of the things they were training out. It's so sad to hear about somebody getting to that point and then one thing going sideways on the check ride and then they give up. The real question is, what about that mentality is causing them to walk away because of that one thing? What is it that's going on that would cause them to say, I'm no good at this, I'm just going to let it go, or I don't want to deal with another examiner again, and so I'm done with this, I'm out. I think I've had that happen with one applicant many years ago who got an unsatisfactory for really one fairly small thing, and I never heard from them again, and I don't believe they continued training. I wonder about that, right? Would it have been different with an easier atmosphere in the check ride? Would it have been different if the applicant had been in a different mindset? These are all pieces of the puzzle.
That's a good question. When I was administering tests, the one thing as an examiner, we have to show the applicant respect and feel that the instructor would not have signed them off, endorsed them to take the test unless they were really ready. It's not always true. So it's really important for you, the instructor, to infuse them with the ability to do these things on their own. There's a point at which you hand over the responsibilities of making the decisions, the aeronautical decisions, to your student, and that's a big player. If you're always talking them through maneuvers or helping them with the answers, there's less chance of them learning, and that's right in the aviation instructor's handbook, to turn over the responsibility of making decisions to the student. That includes the evaluation at the end. We always sit there, we always evaluate our students at the end of a flight, which we should do, but at a point, we need to ask them, what do you think? And I've had people say, oh, my steep turns were perfect. Well, you were off by 150 feet, so that's not going to hack it on the test. More importantly, it's not safe. That's why I'm not going to endorse you for this test. But involve them in the evaluation when they get it, when you see that they're getting it. And that's sometimes hard to tell. But involve them with the, get them directly involved with the decision making, teach them what's involved. And they can also, don't forget, there's FAAsafety.gov, where there's a lot of really good information. There's also there's some aviation website, NTSB accident reports, that talk about the accidents that happen. Those are really, really good learning scenarios that you can teach to your students. Use your own education, your own knowledge to help them. Don't be the person who takes the word of anybody. Go look it up, make sure it's correct. And I think I don't know if we all saw on the radio, this poor woman reporter who was told that the engine quit and the aircraft had to land on a highway because of failure of the flux capacitor. So don't be that person, okay?
I think it might be helpful to ask your client, your student, kind of like what you do as an instructor, look at the root cause analysis of the item that was unsatisfactory. You may have to ask why about 7 times. So why did you bust? Well, I landed, I had a high flare, dropped in landing, DPE told me to go around. Well, why'd you do that? Well, my aim point was shifting. Well, why was that happening? Well, because I was distracted. You may get to a point where the student realizes that the cause of this unsat event was showing up 3 hours early to a check ride, which has happened, and they were fatigued. And maybe that could make them feel a little bit better about themselves to say, okay, there's ways I can fix this. I can, analyze this and overcome by looking at the chain of events that led to the unsatisfactory event.
And another emailed question. I have a student who's very talkative while we fly in the airplane. And I'm worried about this for their practical test. During the check ride, I worry about them over-explaining themselves while they're conducting maneuvers, particularly performing emergency maneuvers. Do you think it would be worrisome to send an applicant up for a check ride who is over-communicative in the cockpit? Everyone's pointing at Randall.
The question is, how are they managing their nervous system, right? I talk during check rides. I talk when I am taking check rides. I don't talk when I'm giving them. I mean, I talk a little, but I'm not talking through maneuvers. But I have absolutely been that guy who's a little nervous and talking stuff through. It's really how you manage it. And if you are not able to get out of your own way for whatever reason, then that's something that you want an examiner to catch. I I saw this image of this man and his son walking away from an airplane. He was a 65-hour private pilot, and I've got to think he had just gone for a check ride. He rented a plane on takeoff. They were 200 feet when they had flames and smoke, and he put it down in a field on the far side of the runway and walked away from it. That is absolutely real. We have parents who come to check rides to go flying with their students as soon as they pass. You've got to be ready when you show up for it. And if you talk through stuff, whatever, you do you, but get out of the way of your nervous system when things are going sideways. And the check ride environment is one place where the consequence is just having to come back and do it again, and typically not bending metal if you're not able to really grasp everything that's going on all at once. So I'm not quite sure why Pat was pointing at me, but I know we all started smiling because we've all been with applicants who talk a lot. I have been an applicant who talks a lot, so I have a lot of compassion for people who are nervous on check rides.
That's a normal
I-
thing
I-
to want to talk. And when I was testing, I would tell people, if you want to talk, go right ahead, just don't miss any radio calls. On the other side is, as an instructor, again, we can talk and we're teaching them, but as you teach them and they're starting to get the task and understand it and situational awareness increases, we need to reduce our talking.
Yeah,
So
I don't mind that. If an
always at
applicant's
the level on the check rides is, on one hand, I'm a big fan of stress and being able to handle yourself under some kind of stress. Flying is inherently stressful. We don't belong up there. So on the other hand, they're so uptight a lot of times that it's like, do I want to add any more stress to this? And most of the time I don't, other than the simulated engine outs and all that stuff, which are sort of stressful because I always tell them, don't recover from that until I tell you. And they start getting edgy, like now. And so anyway, I generally don't try to create a stressful situation in a check ride.
Thank you.
I tell many of my applicants, it's quite the sort of an opposite situation. I tell many of my applicants, I'm not going to say much during the flight at all, and it's going to be really weird because you're used to getting instant feedback from your instructor. So it's somewhat uncomfortable for applicants because I just sit there and I brief them. Hey, you can say I'm going to go fly in the Bravo without a clearance, and I'll just go, okay, and we'll see what happens. So it's the opposite. Sometimes the evaluator is not talking very much, and what's the student used to. In terms of the applicant talking, that's great as long as they don't miss those radio calls. Like I think it was Mark who mentioned that.
I do a lot of CFI initial applicants, and when I tend to method act when I'm being a student, and I do dumb stuff. Nothing's going to get us hurt, but I remember pulling up into a chandelle one day and applying hard opposite rudder, and the flight instructor candidate goes, "Whoa, what are you doing? My controls, what was that?" Just being a student, man. Good job, good catch. Rich, is there more? I feel like we're blowing past you a lot. Is there more that you wanted to add to any of this?
No, I'm enjoying hearing some of your stories and agreeing with a lot of this. I actually like applicants and students talking in the cockpit. If that's what they need to do to get through something, and they want to walk themselves through it and talk to themselves the whole time, as long as they're not missing things like you mentioned, I think that's a great thing. Let people be themselves, just like you said.
I certainly appreciate people talking through when they're headed for that hold short line on the runway. I'm going to stop in front of that line because otherwise my feet are right there on the brakes, just in case you don't.
Yeah, sometimes the person is telegraphing to you what they're doing because that's what you want to know. You want to know some of these things sometimes. Yeah, so I think it can be a good thing.
Don Martell was always watching the eyes because the eyes go first and then the hands go. And that's one thing that I learned from him, to just sit back so you can see the picture and you can watch an applicant's sort of eyes and where they're going and watch them how they're thinking about stuff.
I had another one just emailed in, and I'll include sport pilot flight instructors in this one as well. The question was, what makes a flight instructor applicant stand out to you in a positive way? That's what makes a flight instructor applicant stand out to you in a positive way.
That's a great question. Their preparation and their command of their own nervous system, a clear understanding that this check ride is different from all the other check rides because now you're teaching and not just responding to questions that the DPE gives you.
And that's a really good point. The difference, one of the differences is, of course, as an examiner, the examiner is not supposed to ask a leading question. A well-prepared flight instructor applicant will talk from A to Z through a task without being asked to tell us or tell the examiner anything else. Whereas in the other tests, there is a little bit of leeway of that you can keep the question going, which is a little bit difficult to do. But the CFI, they should be able to, you should say, tell me about 8s on pylons. And all you do as an examiner is you just be quiet and let them go. The one thing you can teach your students who are going for the CFI that helps the examiners is when they're done teaching something, whether it be orally or in the air, is to, when they're done, say, do you have any questions? And that's the cue to the examiner that they're done teaching that particular task. They've got to make sure that they've taught everything, though.
They say the guidance they give us is also addresses common errors.
Matt posted in the chat, are there any systemic issues in knowledge or skills that the DPs have noticed recently? So now we're on to systemic.
I feel like cross-country navigation dead reckoning kind of consistently problematic for those of us who've grown up with magenta lines. I had an applicant take off in the opposite direction.
Opposite of the direction of the cross country or wind?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Navigating toward ocean, not mountains.
I would also, I would throw aircraft systems in there. A lot of people don't really know their aircraft, and particularly like even some of the simple things like the antennas on the airplane. How many people can't tell you what 3 or 4 of the things sticking out of the top of their airplane are?
How many, you talk about systems, how many of you know what a vernitherm is? Anybody? 2 people. Okay. Do we expect a student pilot to know this, or even a commercial or ATP to know what a vernitherm is? Of course not. But we do expect them to understand what a magneto is, the P lead, the electric fuel pump, when it's used, when it's not used, and so on and so forth. But the systems, I'm finding that's one of the weak areas unless it's stressed by the instructors. By the way, a vernitherm is, you all know what a thermostat is in your car. It directs the coolant through the radiator on a hot day, and it keeps the coolant from going through the radiator on a cold day to hold the heat of that coolant inside the engine so it remains at the proper temperature. Vernitherm basically does the same thing with the engine oil. You can't see it, you can't inspect it, but if you see a high oil temperature, that could be one of the problems with the system. And I did not make that up. That's true.
We are expected to test at the correlation level of understanding. So if you're coming to me for a CFI test, I would expect that you would be able to understand the system thoroughly enough that you're not at the rote level. So when you're teaching something, you may teach to the rote level to someone who is at that level of knowledge, but I may ask you to also teach to a higher level. And I may ask a learner a question about that system that would require you to have that level of correlation. I'm trying to think of a good example. I did a ride one time where the airplane used MOGAS instead of 100 low lead. How would that make the engine perform differently? Those kinds of correlation level questions.
I wrote to our instructors at East Coast Aero Club, and I entitled my message 3, 2, 55, and you. And the 3 with the 3 astronauts in Apollo 13. How many know about Apollo 13? Why did they live? They lived because they knew the systems. They hadn't practiced or trained for the specific emergency, but they knew the systems and they figured it out. 2, I had a fire in the airplane I flew in the Air Force. I knew enough to turn the generators, and that aircraft, it was a generator, and that didn't stop the fire, but it stopped the source. And then 155 was Sully Sullenberger. He knew basically what to do. He thought about this and planned to do it. And so the question is, what are you going to teach your students about the systems? You got to teach them the systems. If you're not up to the speed on the systems, you can read about it, but go to the mechanics. We don't like to disturb mechanics when they're doing their job, but they are the greatest source of what the systems do, and they will teach you a lot. They're really, really very, very smart people, and of course they take care of us and they keep us safe.
I just learned
During
today
an
that Jim
exam-
Lovell's still alive.
Sorry, Randall, I stepped on you.
I said, I just learned today that Jim Lovell is still alive. He was the commander of 13.
If I see an airplane with an open cowling, I will take an applicant down to that airplane and say, give me tell me about this engine, and see if they can point to components. And of course, depending on the level of test, I expect a certain level of knowledge. For the private or sport pilot applicants, I expect you to know what the knobs inside the airplane do and where they're connected. And if you pull out the P-hack and show me what that's doing and show me a diagram, even better. Other general knowledge topics I find that are lacking is aerodynamics. What are left turning tendencies? What causes them? Why do we care about them? Adverse yaw. Aerodynamics of a stall, spin, as Mark was talking about, and then ForeFlight. Great tool. You got to know what goes into it. You got to know how to set it up. And if we're going to use your navlog in ForeFlight, great. You should be able to explain every block that's in the navlog in ForeFlight, and know where those numbers come from. And then I'll have you prove to me you know where the numbers come from in the POH, for example. Trends in flight that I've seen, same thing with Randall. You got to be able to dead reckon without any assistance from moving map displays or GPS. I'll turn them off and just watch you map read. And it works when you do it right and you plan it right. Knowing how to divert and knowing what the ACS tells you that you're going to tell me in a divert. I don't want to have to pull teeth to say, okay, so what's the heading? What's the time? What's the fuel? You're going to, you need to divert. Let's talk about why, what you're thinking about. Go arounds. Please do go arounds. Please practice go arounds. Get good at go arounds. So when you're doing your landings on any of the checks, any of the tests, you don't like it, please take it around. Let's try it again. We can't always get everything set up right. Something happens, unstabilized approach, wind gust. So practice those go arounds and get good at them. And then if I'll play to your weak side if I'm giving you a test. So if you're trained at a towered field, we're going to a CTAF field and vice versa. So you should be able to operate in both environments without any hints from your DPE.
This is Stephen K. Brown. Listening to this from the examiners, for the instructors out there, I'm kind of curious if familiar with Bold Method. And they do a little text or email daily that has 3 sections on it. Basically like an explanation of systems, a little quiz that's kind of like private pilot type check rides, and then usually another article you can link to, or it links to describe, go into something maybe more in depth. But I was listening to Pat and others, is I've been signed up for it for years. You know, it's maybe once every 3 weeks. I get enough of a kick out of it that I'll take the little quiz. But for anybody learning, it's a terrific way every day to get in, and they'll take you through and ask you like 7 questions with pictures of an aircraft with the cowling off. Then the next day they'll ask you 7 questions or 6 questions about Class Bravo airspace and entering it. You know, special use airspace the next day. And it basically just goes right down the area of operations and tasks out of the various practical test standards, and for different categories too. You know, you'll sometimes find helicopter, rotorcraft specific questions on it. So, yeah, for the instructors, I'd recommend take a quick peek at it and maybe get it out there to your students. You know, if they're training over 6 months and they're doing that little 2-minute thing every day, they're going to probably learn quite a bit in a short period of time. Who's familiar with it, just out of curiosity? Okay, good.
I'm a big fan of pilot workshops. I think these guys are out of Nashua. And they put together some phenomenal stuff, especially the IFR mastery course. And they put you the scenarios that they do for that are super well done, and really good explanations from the CFIs and DPEs that are on their panels. So I'll put my endorsement for pilot workshops as well. And I do like Bold Method.
How many out there are instrument aircraft, CFI IA, instrument airplane? Do you know where the requirement, what constitutes being established is? Does anybody know where that comes from? It's half the needle throw, okay, from the case to the center. It's half the needle throw, which means that's when you can descend on an approach, so on and so forth. Where does that come from? Does anybody know? I didn't either for a long time. I knew just what was in the military and what FedEx told us, which was 1/3 of a dot. But it's from an ICAO document. Who would know to look at an ICAO document? I certainly didn't know that it was in an ICAO document. I was testing somebody and I said, tell me when you're established. And he said, well, it's when the needle's dead centered. And I said, no, that's not right. And so I called a buddy of mine, my old roommate from college, who was an MD-11 captain at FedEx. And he said, wait a minute. And he gave me the answer. And I said, how did you know that? He says, it's in this book called Everything Explained for the Professional Pilot. Now, I've heard somebody tell me that the FAA is not a fan of this. Honestly, I think this is one of the best reference books I've ever seen, to tell you the truth. This guy did his homework. This is the 15th edition, I think, is the latest one. And it has all the references. I can't talk for anybody but myself, but I'm going to buy the new one because they have a 15th edition. Look at the top, and in smaller type, they have all the references. So if you want to find out where that came from, it's right in there. It's around page 55 that talks about being established, if you want to teach that.
Can you repeat the name of the book?
Everything Explained for the Professional Pilot? Yeah, by Richie Lingle.
there's another beautiful thing that Pilot Workshops does that the BPPP program does for Beechcraft pilots is pitch, power, and performance tables as part of the IFR curriculum. Obviously, it applies everywhere, but it's a big deal for instrument pilots and instrument instructors, and also helps a great deal with steep turns to understand the relationship of pitch and power to performance.
I have to swing real quick. If Matt or Heather are here from Independent Helicopters, I do have helicopter questions for you as well. So I'm not sure if you called in already, but if you are, we're ready for you. I did get another emailed question concerning multi-engine training. I will try not to butcher this question. The person asked, I have a client who is looking to train in his twin engine aircraft, which has an auto feather system. Should I be encouraging him to keep the auto feather system on for the duration of their check ride, particularly when they conduct engine failures in flight?
What's the airplane? Do we know?
Yeah, we don't know.
You've got a POH to deal with. I'm thinking, what's got auto feather? Or DA-42, I suppose, 62, a King Air. You've got POH stuff. Yeah, it's not really auto feather in the diamonds. You've got POH stuff there that's going on. We do have to test your ability to feather and secure a prop, but POH is going to take precedence. And God, we've had so many multi-engine training accidents. We really need to be smart about how we practice and test the single engine stuff in twin engine airplanes. John, to your point, nobody that I know is doing single engine stalls anymore. Thank the Lord. And we have to do, we have to demonstrate simulated VMC and recovery on tests, but yikes.
Call back on you all too. Is there any questions so far that we can address? Yeah, okay. Sorry, I still only have one microphone after this whole year.
Hello again. My question would be if you guys prefer for the candidate to contact you, or do you prefer the flight instructor to contact you first and keep a close contact with them regarding the check ride that I may be conducted? And another thing is cancellation fees. I want to know what's your opinion on those.
We are specifically told that we are not allowed to accept cancellation fees. The direction that we're given is that we can only accept money if the applicant and airplane are qualified. As far as applicants or instructors, you can go either way, whatever you want to do. I always prefer when it's the applicant, because it means we have a chance to build a little bit of a relationship before they're sitting down in front of me on test day and everybody's nerves are up. You're always welcome to reach out to me about tests. I'm good at getting back right away in general, generally within hours, if not a day, when you have questions about a check ride. Anything we can do to help with the nerves, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, I don't mind the initial. Many instructors reach out and say they have an applicant, and I'll say, yeah, just have them contact me direct, and I'll go with them. I do involve the instructors on every debrief if they're available. So I'd like to have them still in the loop, but mostly it's the applicant that I handle. And I'm with Randall on the cancellation. I try to verify that everybody's ready to go a couple of days prior. So if I need to go to my go to the bench, I can go find some other applicants that are ready to take a check.
I had one of those bench calls. Somebody canceled with 24 hours, and I made 45. I reached out to 45 people before the last person on the list got a slot. So if you're in the queue, please be ready to go.
Apologize for being rude to our examiner panel, by the way. Are there any topics that you all would like to discuss in particular?
One of the things I'm really lit up by is I want to figure out a way to do national level booking as opposed to booking singly with each examiner. But I think until we have some level of buy-in, even though there's a bunch of great products out there on the market right now, I don't think it makes any sense until all or the majority of examiners are using them. That's the thing that I would like. I would love to make the process streamlined and cheaper and more available. Um, it's such a challenge when you know that there are 1,000 tests that are needed and you know that you can't do them. And so for me, a part of my self-care involves taking off for the winter, and I always feel guilty about it. And my colleagues remind me, if you burn out and you quit, then we're not served by that either. So that's a real balancing act. Um,
I tried a system that was an attempt, Randall, at that national level scheduling. It involved too many touches on my part. I had to go back to the system and go to my own system to try to make everything work. But if the FAA were to come up with a national level schedule, that would be great. And I try my best. I try to answer every inquiry within a couple days. Sometimes I'll answer you just plain no. And I think you would prefer that than just letting me have you hang. So, so I try to give everybody a good idea. And sometimes I'll just, say, just call me in 2 weeks or email me in 2 weeks. Let me get through my, my schedule lately has been a hamster wheel. Where I have cancellations and then I just have to leapfrog those cancellations to a later date, and I just can't get ahead. So I understand why Randall leaves this area during the winter. You're not missing much.
This is Stephen K. Brown. Question for the examiners with what Randall was mentioning. Are all of you reporting to managing specialists in your local FSDO, or is anybody reporting to the national branch AFS 970?
Nobody's national yet. We did have, Stephen, there were a handful of people who came out of class, I want to say in December, who went to national reports, who were scattered all over, but nobody, as far as I know, in either actually anything, Bradley, Boston, or Portland. None of us are national.
Yeah, Randall, when I was attending DPE school, end of January, they were saying there was about a little over 100 examiners nationwide that were reporting direct to Oklahoma City, mainly from FSDOs that didn't have anyone qualified to be a managing specialist, or just had so few people that they just couldn't manage, anymore, and so they were taking them away. And they told us that within the next 2 to 3 years, they hope to have every DPE in the country away from the FSDOs and being managed by Oklahoma City in some type of a framework. But that's my understanding at the moment.
And the curveball that was just thrown to that is now the national requirement that federal employees be at their desks and not working remotely. So that is throwing a massive monkey wrench into the number of inspectors who are available, because you're having inspectors leave because they're not able to commute many hours to be at a desk when they were hired as remote employees post-COVID. So watch this space, but mucho turmoil inside that side of things.
Probably the exception to that is the specialty aircraft, the SAEs. They don't report to the local FSDO. They report to AFS 610, which is Oklahoma. And the managing specialist has to travel all over the country to do your annual checkups.
Almost up on time. Does anybody have a particular question from the audience? Rotax specific? I'm just messing with you guys in the front.
Tyler raised their hand.
We'll do this one first. We'll pass this around.
All right, just one last question here. As I just got my private and I'm looking forward to getting my IFR. So I just want to ask for some advice from CFIs, from DPEs. How can I prepare for the check ride and how can I be a much safer pilot? Because ultimately my goal is to be in the airlines. So I definitely want to build my skills up to the standards or even higher.
Just like any check ride, start with your ACS, work backwards from there so you know what the standards are. The ACS describes the maneuvers pretty in depth, and then know what the books say, the instrument procedures handbook, instrument flying handbook say about each of those tasks. And you know, but I would just recommend start with that ACS. They're very well written, in my opinion, and they're pretty clear.
Make sure that your instructor is uncompromising. In other words, if you make a mistake and you realize, I made an error, and they say, nah, don't worry about it. That's okay. Get a new instructor. You're paying a lot of money, and it's too important not to get somebody who is going to say no. We need to continue to do this so that you understand it, get it right, understand the risks involved with the tasks that you're doing, but find an instructor who will not compromise your training.
There are very few instructors out there who are giving instruction in actual instrument conditions. And I don't have a position on that right now in a public forum wearing my DPE hat. But I will tell you that as an instrument rated pilot, taking off on one of my first cross countries where I was in the soup for my first time, I broke out of a layer 90 degrees off course after I noticed my ground speed was 45 knots. So I was about ready to become one of those stall spin accidents, even though I was an instrument rated pilot. So better than the standard is absolutely a good place to aim. And instrument work is something that will absolutely get you hurt. And so you do need to be right on top of all the variables, and they are compounded massively compared to where you were as a private pilot when you could see outside the airplane.
I know we're not done yet. Mike Hoff, when you get done, if you could see me, I got a question for you about the meaning of life, if that's okay. Okay. The one thing, if you're looking for some of the information, which is really good. First of all, one thing I do want to say before we do finish up here, I want to thank Dominic for setting this up and having this forum and in person. I think what he's doing is adding immeasurably to your knowledge by setting this up. And I think we owe him a round of applause.
Thank you, Mark. And I didn't mention this on the Fastium flyer, but we do the DPE forum from 6 to 8 p.m. And then we get to the philosophy of life from 8 to 9 p.m. So you're welcome to stay after for that, but the meaning of life is aerobatics. I did see one more question. Sorry, Tyler, for keeping you waiting. And Randall, thank you for being an awesome co-MC here. Tyler, looks like you raised your hand. Do you have a particular question? Hope I didn't just double mute you. There we go.
I've been silenced. Oh, wait, no, here we go.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We've given you permission, yes.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay. Hi, longtime listener, short time CFI, Tyler Schroeder. So I have a kind of, and this is to end the topic, I wanted to wait more towards the end. So it kind of looking back on it in history, I think the last time there was ever a commercial aircraft type that was added on was a helicopter in 1946. Looking into the future now with specifically companies like Beta Technologies that have advanced air mobility, we're seeing a new type of commercial transport aircraft that's going to be around for not only cargo, but also for, transporting passengers, civilians. My question for you is, when a new technology like this emerges, and I'm not saying you guys have the wisdom of the ancients, but I just wanted to kind of put the heads together and see what's going to happen. When there are rotor drones that come out that are, advanced air mobility types of aircraft, we're going to have a very low amount of DPEs that will be able to do check rides for that, for PPL, IFR, commercial, what have you. And I don't know if the FAA has talked about this, and unfortunately I was here late, so I don't know if you guys touched on this already, but from your experience in your line of work as a DPE, and I know, Pat, you spent some time in the military and having new technologies come in and out, how is this going to work for something that is so specifically civilian at first, that didn't really get the dry run through the military or through anything else, where we're all of a sudden transporting civilians via air, these new type of aircraft that haven't really been tested, and we're going to need DPEs that who normally know the entire book inside and out, that will have to know a book that was written almost just yesterday.
I can actually kick off on that one. So powered lift category, the guidance for that category came out late last year, I believe. It was an 800-page document.
Yes, that is correct. I guess more of my question is, for getting a DPE qualified into that, what are the steps that are going to be taken to get someone into that realm? I know that for fixed wing and for rotorcraft, usually they look for very well experienced individuals within their area of expertise. So I'm kind of curious what the selection process will be like for DPEs going into that.
For that initial cadre.
Tyler, the short version is that we have no idea. The slightly longer version is the threshold for us to do additional types. Seaplane, they want 500 hours in seaplane. I don't have it. Sometimes they give a letter of deviation. They're not giving me one. When the 787 came out, what they did is they took the people who'd been flying the 777 and the 74, and they kind of just threw them at the 787 simulators. I don't believe the FAA is going to do that. The current requirements to fly Beta's vehicle are commercial rotorcraft and commercial fixed wing. So you're going to get DPEs who've got that kind of experience, who are going to need to have some kind of threshold in that vehicle type before they're going to be able to examine in them, is my guess. And that is probably years down the road now before there's a large enough demand to not just name one or two examiners who have been in that development process to go do it nationally, almost like the SAE department.
And I hate to go on the recording and mention this, but we went up to Beta Technologies on a field trip last year, and the company said specifically, as you look through the newer guidance, the initial cadre of instructors that should be teaching this category, they want both folks who are experienced in rotorcraft and fixed wing aircraft. They could talk about, a whole bunch of things, vortex ring state, for example, but they can also talk about fixed wing aerodynamics. So it seems like there's this crossover, and anyone please correct me if this sounds incorrect, where if they can get a Osprey pilot to transfer over in the civilian world, great. But also there has to be more folks outside of that. So they're looking for the rotorcraft rated and fixed wing rated folks to jump in and be those initial instructors. Did that
Thank you
help
very much. Yes, it did.
Any other questions before we close out tonight? Everybody's thinking donuts still. Anything from our examiners before we close out tonight? I want to make sure that everybody's gotten any topics they'd like to across to our audience.
Reach out anytime. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to help you however I can.
Ditto. Thank you very much, Dominic, for putting this together.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here and sharing your expertise and answering the questions from our community. I'll officially say now that this concludes our spring 2025 New England CFI DPE seminar, but it doesn't have to end here. please grab some food. I love talking. I'm sure some of our examiners would like to talk to you as well. Let's stick around, have a conversation, talk about flight training. We'll keep it going. Okay. Thanks everybody online. Thanks everybody in person. You're all distinguished, knowledgeable scholars. I hope you have a great night.
I've got to go. I'm sorry I can't stick around.
All right.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Randall.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Pat. Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, good night, everybody.